Hi everybody, we're going to be talking about the human reproductive system today. The standard is L.16.13, describe the basic anatomy and physiology of the human reproductive system, describe the process of human development from fertilization to birth, and major changes that occur in each trimester of pregnancy. Um, when I looked over the standards, mostly what you're going to have to know is some definitions. What are these terms? And then you're going to have to know as a fetus develops from fertilization to birth, what's happening in each trimester, and then what does things like the placenta, the umbilical cord, the amniotic sac, and the amniotic fluid do, and yeah, that's it. Now I'm just letting you guys know that on the very next slide is a picture of the inside of a male penis, and then after that we take a look at the female body as well. So giggle if you want. There it is, right? Now I want you to know something. I think there are like 12 slides, and I have devoted one, yes, one, to the human male reproductive system, because in terms of all human reproduction, the male structure is pretty much irrelevant for 99.9% of it, you know? So let's just talk about what it takes to get the semen and the sperm into the vagina, into the fallopian tubes for the fertilization process. It's a very simple procedure. Now, there's several structures here. Of course, the penis, you're probably familiar with that to some degree. But it is a tube, which means down the center it's hollowed out. That is called the urethra. Two things happen there, and right here is where those two things kind of split apart. From the bladder, the urine, it can be emptied. This is a muscle right here. This muscle controls and allows you to hold the urine into the bladder until it's time to be released, and then it comes out. Of course, this is also where these two canals intersect, and the seminal vesicle through through this lengthy structure here called the vas deferens. The seminal vesicle can do some stuff to push this out, and so the semen comes out the exact same way. So very efficient structure if you think about it, because it does several things more than just urinate or ejaculate. So it's a two for one. Now let's move down here. The scrotum, that's just a sac-like pouch. It's just a flap of skin in which the testicles and a few other structures sit. One of the main reasons for this is because sperm doesn't do well at body temperature. It needs to be slightly cooler than body temperature when it develops. Okay. Now you may be saying, okay, well, when it gets inside the female, that's in body temperature. But remember what I said, it's only when it develops. As the sperm is developing, it needs to be developed cooler than the 98.6 degrees the body normally puts out. So the testicles need to be outside of the body, well, outside of the main part of the body, so that they can develop in a slightly cooler environment. And we're talking like 97.9 or something, just not even a whole degree cooler, but cool enough that the sperm can develop. There are lots of problems in which the testicles may get pulled up closer to the body because you're wearing clothing that are too tight or underwear that's too tight, or various other issues in which the testicles did not descend into the scrotum properly, and so as a result you have problems developing sperm. This can lead to infertility. A lot of times the body just is warmer than normal and the sperm can't develop, so they literally give you underwear with ice in it, and it keeps the sperm or the testicles cool until the sperm can develop properly, and then you can have a baby. All right, but that's its purpose, is to keep the testicles outside to where it's cooler. All right. Now the epididymis is found on the upper part. It's sitting on top of the testicles, or the testes. We use those terms, it's the exact same thing. Even this word right here, testis, T-E-S-T-I-S, T-E-S-T-E-S, and testicles are basically the same thing, right? But on top of the testicles are the epididymis. This is where the after the sperm is starting to develop here, they mature here. The very last stage of meiosis occurs in the epididymis. Then there's the prostate gland. That's the structure here. It produces a fluid to help to create the semen. It also helps to aid in the longevity of the sperm. By the way, the epididymis attaches to something called the vas deferens, which we're going to go to in a minute. these aren't particularly in order, so it's kind of hard to keep track. The testicles are the testes. This is where meiosis occurs to produce the beginning of the human gamete or the male gametes, the sperm cells. They start here, they finish in the epididymis, they go into the vas deferens, and they work their way up here into the prostate gland where they're going to be ejaculated, right? The seminal vesicles, which are here, they are the glands at the ends of each vas deferens. Remember, there's two vas deferens because of two testicles. So at the end of each one of those, there is the seminal vesicles. These produce the rest of semen. Okay, sperm gets here, and of course they're traveling through some type of small fluid. But here we add a lot of oils and actually quite a bit of sugar so that the sperm can absorb that to keep them alive because they have a very long trip ahead of them, right? The urethra, of course, um, is the empty, or it's the tube, and that's from here. From this point down is the urethra. By the way, from here to here is called the ureter. Actually, that's not true. I said that. From here down is the urethra. I don't know what I'm thinking. From the kidneys coming down into the bladder is something called the ureter. Now, if you've ever heard of anybody with kidney stones, typically kidney stones start in the kidneys and they get lodged between the kidney and the bladder. And if you've never had that, pray that you don't, because I've had it and it's painful. All right, but the urethra starts here, it goes down here. It intersects with the vas deferens. The seminal vesicle will have connected, can do things. So we've got two separate things going on here: the urination and ejaculation, right? So the urination starts here, but then right here, this from here on out, the ureter does both. Okay. And that's the end of the structures. That's all you really need. Somewhere in here is the bulbourethral gland. We don't talk about that much, but this is the muscular contraction that causes ejaculation, because I know a lot of you guys are curious. All right. So then, of course, what comes out of here are two structures, or two substances. Sperm, which is just the cell, the sex cell. It is the opposite of the female egg. And then semen, which contains the sperm and lots of other things that are produced by the prostate gland, the seminal vesicle, and the bulbourethral gland. All three of these glands aid in the production of semen. And then, of course, it shoots out and it goes into the vagina. That's it. That is the sole purpose of the male reproductive system, is to produce sperm and to deliver it into the right place. I will leave how that's done to your imagination, because we're going to go on to the female reproductive system. You know, I got to be honest with you. I mean, look at that. Okay, that looks like the owner's manual to a jet engine versus this looks like the owner's manual to a car, or even like a bicycle. But don't let it fool you. The female reproductive system is incredibly complex, but the structure really isn't. It's just not that difficult to understand. We have, of course, the vagina. Okay, and that is to incorporate the penis during sex. The cervix, which is a sphincter between the uterus and the vagina, it's regulated. It opens and closes depending on the cycle of the female, which we do not have to learn, and I was going to have to teach that to you guys, but I looked it up. You do not need to know the menstrual cycle. So what we're really looking at here is you just need to understand that basically this is a very convoluted and complex tunnel for the sperm to swim up and then connect to, and then this is where the egg is housed. So during sex, there is going to be sperm present here at the end of sex, and that sperm actually literally through in the ovaries help, or I mean the uterus and the fallopian tubes help, but the sperm usually has to swim against the flow of gravity up this way, and half the sperm goes to the right, half the sperm goes to the left, and it's just an actual random luck if there's an egg there. This is the ovaries. The ovaries are similar to the testicles in that they are maturing an egg instead of sperm. They produce one egg, whereas males produce thousands and thousands and millions of sperm. One egg is released and it starts to travel down the fallopian tube. Now, the fallopian tube and the ovaries aren't totally connected. It's not like there's an airtight, although it's not air, but it's not like these are tightly wrapped around there. Occasionally the eggs slip out this way and go this way. And oddly enough, a sperm could get this far, and a pregnancy could happen out in this area here. And And if it happens, it's not impossible to let this pregnancy go to term. If it happens out here, although it's so unbelievably rare, I don't know how often it happens, but it's very rare. Now, one of the worst things that can happen is what's called an ectopic pregnancy, and that's when the egg gets fertilized here, and instead of making it all the way down into, once the egg gets fertilized, it starts working its way down the fallopian tube, and it's growing and developing at the same time. It gets fertilized here. I'm getting back to the ectopic pregnancy. Just hang on. It gets fertilized here, and it starts to grow and divide. And by the time it gets here, it's what we call a morula, which is about 16 cells. The cells grow and divide. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, 16 becomes 32, then 64, then 128, or somewhere around there. And it finally embeds into the wall of the uterus. But it's a morula as it passes down here. And this takes a few days, by the way, for the fertilized egg to reach its way down here and get into, and it'll embed either here or here or here in the uterus. Okay, now sometimes it can embed further up in here, and that's bad because there's not enough room here, and the fetus can't develop, and it will destroy the fallopian tube and the ovary. And to be honest with you, in that case, the best thing to do is surgically remove the embryo as rapidly as possible, because otherwise it'll kill the mom. Okay, the baby will never be able to survive. Now, I think they're working on that, but by the time they find out that the pregnancy is ectopic, the fetus is already well established in here, and to try to move it from here to here, or the embryo is already well established here, try to move it from here to here would be practically impossible. I don't know that anybody's ever done it. They just remove the embryo, usually have to take this tissue out, but at least the mom is saved. And she still has another fallopian tube and ovary, so she could still have children. So what the goal here is to get that egg down here, down here. Now it's fertilized up here. It gets it down here, and it embeds somewhere right in here. And this is what happens during the female menstrual cycle. This area right here starts to get engorged with blood. Okay, because if the egg, the fertilized blastula at this point, embeds right here, it can start receiving nutrition directly from the mom, and then an amniotic sac develops, and that connects to the mom with an umbilical cord, and then the baby starts growing and everything's working great. But it has to get here to attach to one of these three surfaces, and if it doesn't, then it will come on out with a monthly discharge. And if the egg is not fertilized, it'll come on out along with all of this tissue here in a monthly discharge as well. Now, there's all kinds of things that regulate that, tons of hormones that control this process right here. And all I can say is thank God I'm a man, and God bless you women for what you have to go through. All right. So a couple of things you need to know. Where does fertilization occur? Does it occur in the vagina, the cervix, the urethra, or the uterus, I'm sorry, or does it occur further up in the fallopian tube? And in fact, it occurs almost to the ovaries. So the sperm has to actually get this far, okay? Because if an egg is fertilized here, it will not embed, it will just come on out. All right, so the egg can be fertilized here, but it will not survive, it'll come on out. For a pregnancy to survive, the egg has to be fertilized up in here. Then as it travels down, it's growing and dividing, and by the time it gets here, it's, quite a few cells, and that mass embeds into the wall of the uterus. Okay. All right. Cervix, by the way, this controls. It opens and closes. It's like a muscle that opens. It's called a sphincter. It opens and closes this valve, or this hole right here. And I have to tell you that this spot right here is one of the leading causes of cancer death among women, because if you have unprotected sex, and if the female has unprotected sex and the person that she is having sex with is positive for something called human papillomavirus, which is the same virus that causes warts on your skin, but if the male has warts on the end of the penis and that virus gets here, something about this tissue is particularly susceptible to that virus, and it makes it turn into cancer. And if it goes long enough, they have to remove the entire have to remove everything, and if that sometimes doesn't save you. So girls, just think twice. All right, that's all I have to say. Okay, let's move along. So now remember, We are dealing with up in here in the way up in the fallopian tubes right past the ovaries. But as I tell you the story, we're moving down the fallopian tubes and into the uterus, okay? So we start out with a fertilized egg, the female egg here, the male sperm here. They're each carrying one copy of every trait that the mom is delivering, one copy of every trait that the dad is delivering. If you want to go back and look at Mendelian genetics, this is only half of the total DNA that the mom has and only half of the total DNA that the dad has, but it is one full set of DNA. It has a copy enough to make one human. So we have redundant copies. So when the sperm fertilizes the egg, they now have two copies of every trait, and that means you're what's called a diploid offspring. You have two copies of every trait. That is the first time that any human is uniquely new. This is the first time this genetic combination has ever appeared in the history of the earth. It's pretty incredible, to be honest with you. But notice it has one copy of information from the mom, one copy of information from the dad, and it is ready to go. Now, the relative sizes here, this isn't even right. I mean, this egg compared to this sperm, this egg would be much bigger. It wouldn't even fit on the screen. It would be so much bigger. The sperm has one job. That's to get that DNA into that egg, and then it's done. Actually, the very end of it goes inside, and the tail breaks off, and this area right here just becomes part of the cell, and the DNA is released into the egg, and that's it. It just kind of disappears, and it's done. No more. I mean, that's within 24 to 36 hours of sex, and then that's it. It's just forget it. It's done. It's gone. Right? Now, to be very, very clear, I want to clear some things up for you guys. There is no way that two sperm get inside of this egg and this egg survives. If two sperms get inside of this egg, then it has 50% more genetic information than it's supposed to, and it will just die. Okay? But how do you get twins, Mr. Thomas? Twins occur somewhere right through here, right? Twins, identical twins occur here at the two-cell stage. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's be clear, only one sperm gets inside of that egg. That egg becomes fertilized. That's it right here. Then it grows and divides through a process called mitosis. You studied that. And now at the two-cell stage, imagine this thing. These two cells are genetically identical. Now imagine them splitting apart. Boom. One cell goes this way, one cell goes this way, and each one of them does this, and they each become their own structure. That's how you get identical offspring. If you're an identical twin, if you know identical twins, this is where they separated. It's possible they could have separated here, but for the most part, this is where they separated. Remember, this is happening as we're moving down the fallopian tube, right? Now, fraternal twins, which are twins that are born at the same time, but they're not genetically identical, that happens here because normally this side releases an egg 1 month, this side releases the egg another month, and they go back and forth. But every once in a while, they'll both release an egg at the same time, and then one sperm goes over here, and a whole different sperm goes over here, and you get two completely different genetic individuals who are just like, they're brothers and sisters and brothers and whatever, but they grew and they lived together and they were born at the same time, but they are not genetically identical. Okay. It's like if you have a sibling, they just happen to be born at the same time. That's really all it is in terms of. Now, they will say they share a bond, and they usually do because they were just, spend a lot of time together. But the point I'm trying to say is identical twins happens here. This cell right here splits apart, and then basically it's like it goes back to here, but now we've got two, and it goes this way. Now, as we're moving down the fallopian tube, one cell divides into two, two goes into four, four is into eight, and then it gets big enough to what's called a morula. Now, we're still moving down the fallopian tube, right? And we're growing and dividing, and just think about how much energy there had to be in that original cell, and it's absorbing energy from the nutritional environment that the mom has produced here inside of the uterus. And at this point, somewhere right through here, it embeds into the wall of the uterus, and now it starts absorbing energy from all that thickened tissue that's in the wall of the uterus right here. Okay, and it starts to grow. Now notice that it is a morula here. Then it becomes a hollow ball called a blastula. This isn't hollow, but this is. That's the difference in the two. This hollow ball becomes blastula. Now, as that blastula starts to form, a little dent appears here. This is called the gastrula. It starts to work its way up. It creates this area here, and I don't know how to tell you this, but this is now The anus. The first thing to develop on humans is the anus, so go figure that one out, right? And after that, this will eventually connect here to create the mouth, and the entire digestive tract starts forming from here. Then little arm buds and head buds and everything comes off, and next thing you know, you got yourself a baby. But it's so interesting that the very first structure to form on humans is the end of the digestive tract, and what do we call that? That's the anus. All right, so here we're going to look at it again. Okay. Uh, the cell is ovulated, it comes out here, and on day 0 has to be that day, because otherwise it's further down here and it's too late. But if it is fertilized, the timing on pregnancy is amazing. But if there is sperm present, it'll let one in, then it's a zygote, and it starts to grow and divide into 2, then 4, and the blastula, here it's a morula on day 4. On You'll notice that the gastrula is starting to form, the blastula has developed, and then the little dent here is starting to form. That's how you know it's a gastrula. So here it's a morula. It is not hollow. Here it is hollow. It's a blastula. And when that little dent fully forms, that now is a gastrula. And it starts to embed into the wall of the uterus, and somewhere around a week later. So for a week, this thing's on its own until it gets embedded into the wall of the uterus, right? And then it starts absorbing energy, and it grows quite a bit before it embeds into the wall of the uterus. Okay? Then it starts absorbing nutrition. It starts to get oxygen and nutrition from the mother's blood, and then any wastes that are produced here start to be released and absorbed by the mother's blood and carried away. And this is the beginning, you know. Okay, so let's talk about what happens next. In the first month, the embryo, that's this thing here, becomes, at this point, once it's embedded, it's an embryo. Okay, it starts to grow an amniotic sac. It starts to create a placenta, which is the amniotic sac and the amniotic fluid and the umbilical cord, and they all are connected here, and it starts to grow out this way into the uterus. Okay, in case you don't remember, that's this area here that we're talking about. We're looking kind of zoomed in right here. It'll start growing out into the uterus. Okay, and that's where it's gonna be. That's your home for 9 months, my man. It's like a spaceship. Now, as it starts to grow, it starts to develop. Now this is the implantation phase. This is not the trimester. It takes what we call 3 trimesters. We divide it into 12-week periods. Those are trimesters. That's going to be the next slide. This is still just implantation. This thing implants here, and it starts to grow. Okay, so the first trimester, this is what we're looking at, girls. For the first few weeks of this thing's life, you may not even know you're pregnant, and in fact, this is the scary part. You've got this thing growing inside of you. You have been impregnated, but you don't even know it, and it's a little scary because you need to start thinking about nutrition now. The first week. In fact, you really should start thinking about nutrition before you get pregnant. It's going to make your child far more healthy. A lot of fetal problems, a lot of future problems in terms of development start right here. For example, you may be pregnant for weeks before you know it, and if in those weeks you consume alcohol, you can develop what's called fetal alcohol syndrome, and in fact it's highly probable. So drinking at all during pregnancy is a no-no, especially in the first few weeks, and you don't even know you're pregnant, and so as a result you got problems. You have a baby that's going to be born significantly underdeveloped in areas that are measurable, and so this is why pregnancy should be planned, and this is just my opinion. This is why pregnancy should be planned. When my wife and I planned our daughter, my wife went on prenatal vitamins for like weeks before, before we started trying, and we tried to create the most perfect environment for our daughter to be developed, and I think it turned out great. I mean, she's wonderful. All right, but this is what's happening, and this thing is growing faster than it'll ever grow again. Every day it's growing faster than it'll ever grow again. So unbelievable amount of stuff just within the first 8 weeks. We're talking about arms, legs, fingers, toes. The head grows larger, the brain starts to develop, the heart beats strong. Okay, the heartbeat is within 28 days. Within the first 8 to 12 weeks, the heart becomes very strong. The mouth is opening and closing. And at this point, you're still in your first trimester, and you may be going to the doctor going, hey, I don't feel good. And you've already got this thing going on inside of you. It's growing like crazy. By the end of the first trimester, there has been all these vital organs such as the heart, brain, kidney, liver, intestines at the end of the first 12 weeks. It's called organogenesis. Genesis means formation, and organ, refers to organs. So organogenesis means the formation of organs, and practically every organ is formed within the first 12 weeks of development. Okay, this all happens, by the way, within the amniotic sac. That's the sac filled with fluid called the amniotic fluid, and it helps to protect and contain the fetus. It's its own little its own little bubble that it lives in. The yellow fluid inside is called the amniotic fluid. It's clear. The amniotic fluid helps to protect it from like if you're walking and bouncing, this thing doesn't get beat around. If you're active, a lot of women are incredibly active during pregnancy. In fact, their hormones cause them to be much more active. You're running around, you're doing exercise, you're playing baseball or football. I mean, you can do that. I wouldn't play football, but you could play baseball or even basketball. Um, but this guy has to be protected as he's developing, and so that's what the amniotic sac does. In addition to that, later on, this little guy starts drinking, like inhaling the amniotic fluid, but drinking it so that it can start to develop this digestive system. So the digestive system has stuff moving through it even before the baby's born. It just kind of opens its mouth and swallows some of that amniotic fluid. Yeah, it's disgusting. Actually, it's really disgusting because later on it turns into skin cells and pee. But we all survived it. We all did it. All right. The second trimester, it starts urinating right into the amniotic sac, and is going to be breathing that later or in drinking that. Um, its its limbs become far more defined. Its fingernails start to become defined. You can tell if it's a male or a female because that area is starting to develop. Its eyes move and it can see light as it filters through the womb. This is in the second trimester. We're talking about 12 to 24 weeks, right? It starts to be able to see light, which helps with its development of its brain. It starts to hear, which helps with more development. It may actually put its thumb to its mouth, and and that's to exercise those muscles. You can maybe see hair starting to grow. We're about halfway done. Fingerprints and footprints are developed. The skin starts to wrinkle. It can actually hear the mom's voice and respond to it. There's even evidence it can hear the dad's voice and respond to it. You'll notice that at this point you're starting to show, by the way, so you get the little baby bump. Um, its nervous system continues to develop and mature, and its lungs continue to develop. Now, second trimester is kind of boring because all it is everything that was there in the first trimester is now just starting to mature, is all that's really going on. And the neural development is the big thing in the second trimester, and this is where you have to be incredibly careful with this child. Plenty of nutrition, plenty of vitamins, especially something called folic acid, making sure that everything this baby could need to develop is there. Because if you're missing, some nutrients, some important nutrients, then this development is going to be retarded. And I'm not saying that word negatively. It is. There's a reason we use that term, and it's because this thing should be growing at maximum pace and it should have everything that it needs. And if you don't give it every bit of nutrition that it needs, then it retards the growth of whatever structure is growing, and it can cause problems with a child. So now there's going to be times that it's unavoidable. I got lucky. My little girl came out perfect. She's wonderful. That's because we did everything we could to make sure, but it still wasn't a guarantee. So even though you do everything right, it's not a guarantee, but you still should do everything right. Because if you don't do everything right, I can promise you that something's going to be slightly off. So be careful with the development of a baby if you ever find yourself pregnant. And you know what, guys, I'm talking to you too. If you ever get somebody pregnant, it's your job to take care of this too. So help make sure that the mom is safe and taken care of. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the third trimester, and this is the last trimester. This starts at about week 25, and it can go all the way up to around week 37. The brain becomes fully developed for the embryo or the fetus. At this point, we're a fetus. The brain becomes fully developed for the fetus. Now, there's still tons of growth and development to do after it's born, but now it's getting to the point where it can sustain itself, meaning that it can run its own biological processes without help from the mother. There's lots of fat under the skin as the baby gets fatter. There's a head full of hair. Sometimes babies are born bald, but if they can grow just a slap head full of hair. Their fingernails are full. Their fingers are, they can fully grasp. Their lungs can actually function at around week 37. Actually, I forgot. We go to week 40, not week 37. So, we're talking about by really week 34, I think, out of 40, this thing could survive as a premature child. And premature children are not doesn't they don't mean nothing's wrong with a mom. Sometimes children are just premature. Sometimes they are way past the time. Sometimes they go to 42 weeks, and at 42 weeks, you're 2 weeks overdue. You're like, get this thing out of me. And so, uh, you know, I have grandchildren, and I wasn't there, of course, but I was rapidly waiting or eagerly waiting to know that the mom is okay, to know that the child is okay. And and sometimes we had one of my grandchildren went 42 weeks. That's a long time. That's a long time for a baby to be inside of you. But it's okay. My daughter was actually a week late. No, she was a week early. um, and when she was born, here's another thing. When my daughter was born, she had this umbilical cord wrapped all around her, because they get in there and they toss and they turn and they kick and they tumble. And that thing can get wrapped up in you everywhere. And she still was just fine. And here, of course, during the final third trimester, week 33, the fetus starts to work its way into the position like this. It's upside down, and it stays that way for a while. And it stays that way for almost 2 months. Can you imagine being upside down for 2 months? Um, it starts resting on the mother's cervix, which is this bone area here. The bones harden and the skin becomes thicker. By 34 weeks, the fetus would be able, I said that right, 34, it'd be able to survive outside of the womb, even though it'd have to have a lot of help. It'd have to have oxygen therapy and stuff, but it could do it because the lungs are basically the last thing to mature. That's why you would need some oxygen therapy, but you could do it at 34 weeks. That's a full 6 weeks early. Beginning at week 35, there's going to be some rapid growth. It gains a half to 3/4 of a pound per week, you know, and that mommy's tummy is starting to stick out. Babies are considered to have grown to full term by week 37, although week 40 is the goal. So somewhere between 38 and 42 weeks is when the baby should be fully delivered. Going past 42 weeks is a problem, you know, but if you have a doctor, they'll keep an eye on you. And that's it. After that, the baby's born, and you got a whole bunch more problems, but that's later on. But getting the baby out safely through the through the your this structure here, by the way, is the uterus. Okay, remember this little bitty structure right here, this little big guy right here. Well, yeah, that's kind of good. Watch this. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, okay. Well, so here this is the uterus. Here's the cervix. Here's the vagina, and it comes out. Now, I'm telling you, there's a very small opening right there in the bone structure of the female, and there's a very, very, very small opening right there where the cervix is. And so having that to fit through there, that it's kind of gruesome. And so birth is a horrible process. Thank God you don't have to do it once, right? Sadly, there are a lot of babies that just can't work. So they have to come in here to the side. You don't want to come in here in the front because there's a major artery that goes right down the middle, okay? But you want to come in here on the side and make a small incision, and you can bring the baby out that way. That's called a cesarean section. Lots of babies are born that way. Typically, once you have a cesarean, every child after that, you'll probably have to have cesarean. But the baby's fine. And it's so funny because when babies are born naturally, their head has to become, it's still kind of soft. The bones are not fully developed, and the head has to kind of, believe it or not, that sounds funny, turn into kind of a cone shape, and the head kind of squeezes together. That's one of the reasons that they put the little caps on the babies. They're little, it's to keep them warm, but it's also so you don't see that weird head, and you don't freak out. Okay, so it comes through here and then out. Now, if you're born cesarean, that doesn't happen. And so when you're born, you can kind of tell a cesarean baby because their little head looks so perfect. Not that babies aren't beautiful when they come out the natural way, but they're just kind of, it struck me very much when I saw a picture of a cesarean baby versus a naturally born baby. I could talk about this all day because it's a beautiful process if done right. And so, oh, by the way, after the baby's born, there's still a large amount of tissue in here. The amniotic sac, the placenta, the umbilical cord. the mother has to actually there's contractions, and the mother has to push that out too, and it has to come out. Excuse me. And it's a horrible process for the baby and the mama. And I'm just thankful that any mom that chooses to do this to themselves in order to have a child, that makes you a wonderful person, you know. Of course, now why you choose to have it twice, I think it's probably because you have some kind of a brain malfunction, but who knows. Anyway, go back and study this. Take a look. You need to know these structures, these two structures here. You need to know this process here of fertilization and what happens as it's traveling down the fallopian tube. You need to know what happens and it embeds after day 7. And then you need to know what happens here starting after day 7. This thing starts to grow, and you need to know the events of each trimester. Don't make it complicated, but really do study it. All right, there's a start here quiz, and you guys can hop on that. And so go get to work. All right, bye.